Wars fought with guns, tanks, and soldiers. But there was one war unlike any other. A war without open battles. A war fought through fear, ideology, and power. This was the Cold War. After the dust of World War II settled, the world expected peace. Instead, it found tension. The United States emerged as the leader of the capitalist world, wealthy, democratic, and ambitious. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, stood tall as the guardian of communism, proud, disciplined, and determined to spread its ideology. Both powers claimed to fight for freedom. Yet, their visions of freedom were worlds apart. At the Yalta and Potsdam conferences, the cracks began to show. The Allies, once united against Hitler, now looked at each other with suspicion. As Winston Churchill would later declare, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Europe was split in two, the West and the East. Democracy and capitalism on one side, communism and state control on the other. And between them stood a wall of mistrust. The Cold War was not fought on the battlefield. It was fought in the hearts and minds of billions. It was capitalism versus communism, freedom versus control, the American dream versus the Soviet ideal. Each side waged psychological war. Propaganda became a weapon. Films, posters, and radio broadcasts painted the enemy as evil. In America, schoolchildren practiced hiding under desks from nuclear blasts. In Moscow, families were told that Western nations wanted their destruction. The world was divided into two camps: the Western Bloc, led by the United States and NATO, and the Eastern Bloc, commanded by the Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact allies. Then came the race for power, the race for the ultimate weapon. In 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, ending America's monopoly on nuclear might. What followed was a deadly competition. The United States built the hydrogen bomb. The Soviets matched it. By the 1960s, both sides held enough nuclear firepower to destroy the planet several times over. This fragile balance became known as mutually assured destruction, the belief that if one side launched its weapons, the other would respond, leaving no survivors. It was madness, but it kept the peace. The Cold War soon spread across the globe. In 1950, war erupted in Korea. The North, backed by the Soviets and China, clashed with the South, supported by the United States and its allies. When the guns finally fell silent, millions were dead, and Korea remained divided, just as it is today. Then came Vietnam, a conflict that tore America apart. The United States entered the jungles of Southeast Asia to stop the spread of communism, but the war dragged on for years, claiming tens of thousands of lives. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union expanded its reach across Eastern Europe, Africa, and Latin America. The superpowers didn't just fight wars, they funded revolutions, backed coups, and supported dictators, as long as they chose the right side. In 1962, the world came to the edge of destruction. U.S. spy planes discovered Soviet missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from American shores. President John F. Kennedy confronted Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev in a showdown that could have ended humanity. For 13 tense days, the world stood still. Then, at the last moment, diplomacy prevailed. The missiles were withdrawn, and the world exhaled in relief. But the battle for dominance wasn't confined to Earth. It stretched into the stars. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite to orbit the planet. America was stunned. Then came Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, another Soviet triumph. The United States responded with NASA, promising to win the race for the moon. And in 1969, they did. Neil Armstrong's words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," echoed not just in history, but in the rivalry between superpowers. While the public watched the skies, the real battle was fought in the shadows, a world of spies and secrets. The CIA and the KGB turned espionage into an art form. Double agents, coded messages, and silent assassinations became the tools of war. Berlin, divided by a wall of concrete and barbed wire, became the symbol of this silent struggle. Families torn apart, soldiers staring at each other across checkpoints. One city, two worlds. By the 1980s, the Cold War began to crumble under its own weight. The Soviet Union faced economic collapse, stagnation, and disillusionment. Its war in Afghanistan drained its strength. In the West, U.S. President Ronald Reagan called the USSR an evil empire and launched a massive military buildup. But the Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, knew the system was failing. He introduced glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. He sought to reform the Soviet Union, not destroy it. But it was too late. One by one, Eastern European nations broke free from Soviet control. In 1989, Berliners took to the streets and tore down the Berlin Wall, a moment that symbolized the end of an era. 2 years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union itself dissolved. The red flag came down over the Kremlin for the last time. The Cold War was over. But though the war ended, its shadow still lingers. It changed the world, from military alliances like NATO to the global race for technology, from nuclear treaties to the very shape of modern politics. It left us with lessons about power, fear, and survival. For nearly half a century, humanity stood on the brink of extinction, not because of hate, but because of mistrust. And yet through it all, the Cold War showed us something remarkable, that restraint, dialogue, and diplomacy can be as powerful as any weapon. The Cold War may be over, but its echoes still shape the world we live in today. Because history doesn't always repeat itself. Sometimes, it simply chills in silence. This was the Cold War, a war that changed everything, without firing a shot.